let's get started then. Welcome everyone to Perspectives on Graduate School. This evening we'll be hearing advice and experiences of graduate students about their journeys and personal experiences on their path to graduate school. And tonight we're joined by a group of current graduate students who are all members of SACNAS, which stands for the Society and Advancement of Chicanos and Hispanics and Native Americans in Science. And SACNAS is an organization composed predominantly of graduate students. And then us, CURB is a large undergraduate research organization. It stands for Cornell Undergraduate Research Board. And we're really lucky to be able to collaborate and work on this event with them and be able to reach so many undergraduates, just like us, who are interested in research and also potentially interested in graduate school. So without further ado, I'll introduce myself. My name is Jennifer, and I am from the CURB Outreach Committee. And I'll also allow my other moderator to introduce herself and a little bit about the event as well.
Thanks, Jen. So good evening, everyone. My name is DeAndrea. I'm also a member of CURB's Outreach Committee and the other moderator for today. The graduate students today would love to answer any questions that you have for them. And throughout the event, please feel free to put your questions in the chat and we will get to them during the Q&A section. And if you know anyone who may have not been able to make it today, just know that the event will be recorded and posted onto CURB's YouTube channel afterwards. Now, we're going to have panelists briefly introduce themselves with their name, year, and field of study.
Okay, so I'll start. So my name is Irma. I'm a PhD candidate in biochemistry predominantly, but the whole field is known as biochemistry, cell and molecular biology. I'm a fifth year. I identify as a minority, Latina, really, and also first gen. So I'm the first one in my family to attend college in general. For undergrad, I went to UCSD. And there I was a double major. So I got my BS in pharmaceutical chemistry, but I also got my BA in literature. I stuck the science route, obviously. And I am now at Cornell with co-mentors, Bob Weiss and Henning Lin. And I predominantly study cancer cell metabolism. And I particularly look at this metabolic enzyme SIRT5 and its role in breast cancer and the tumor microenvironment. And then I also, so then why did I really choose this path? Why did I go to graduate school, which is what we're describing as our intro at least. So for me, it was largely influenced by one of the mentors that I had the privilege to work with. So her name was Dr. Crenshaw. She's at the bottom right here with her baby. And I joined her lab, or the lab that she was working with, which was the Noel lab at the Salk Institute, which is near UCSD. And there I started off as a volunteer and doing research with her. It was more biochemistry and plant enzymology that I worked there. And we studied like evolutionary roles of some products from tobacco plants, actually. And it was in that lab that I became a McNair scholar, and I got my research funded through McNair, and I was able to stay on various summers with them, being funded by McNair. Additionally, though, for my experience at UCSD, as I mentioned before, I actually also come from a low-income background, and I had to work pretty much during my undergrad. And so I have some pictures here of my work study job at the library, which is this weird spaceship looking building at UCSD. And so I worked on campus at the library for a while until I became interested in science. And I decided that if I had to work, I was going to invest that time in something that I was passionate about and would add to my resume. So eventually I did quit the work study job and I started to get internships in pharmaceutical industry. UCSD is a really good place for that because it's very biotech heavy. So surrounding companies were always around for me. So I started off in this small biotech, Oregon Pharmaceuticals, which was my first experience doing cancer. And I worked on prostate cancer and breast cancer there. And then eventually from that experience, I got other internships that paid doing science. So I also got a Takeda Pharmaceuticals internship, started off as a summer and got hired for 2 years there. So as I wrapped up my degree, and I worked on various autoimmune diseases there. And then I also did, after graduation, I took a gap year. So if anyone has any questions about that, I took a gap year and I continued in industry and worked at J&J during that gap year before applying to graduate school. But for me, graduate school, it started off with Charisse and always was my goal. And as I worked in industry, I just saw that in order to go up and direct your own research or be the director role, you really needed a graduate or professional degree. And that's why I began becoming interested in applying to PhD. And I put this little chart here. So those who have a graduate or professional degree are actually 50% more competitive for the job market. So that was my experience.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mariela. I'm also a fifth-year grad student in the same field as Irma, biochemistry. And I identify as Afro-Latina. I'm Dominican heritage. I'm actually Dominican, so. Next slide, I have some pictures. Okay, so I did my undergrad in private liberal arts college in Vermont. And it was a great experience. It was very different from what Cornell is. And so that was in this college, it was my first experience in working in a lab. Oh, sorry, can you go back? Thank you. Okay, so I worked in a lab that studied chaperones, and that's what I guess spiked my interest in doing like wet lab work. But I was still very undecided throughout college. So I even thought I wanted to get MD after college. So I studied for that. And I also took some two gap years before I went and got my master's. And I got my master's at Hunter College, which is in New York City. And that was the best experience because since this is more like a university, the research was more for publishing oriented and they were graduate students, which there were none of that in my undergraduate university. And then I came to Cornell and I'm in the lab of Feng Hua Hu, and I study the role of a lysosomal protein called progranulin that it's involved in many neurodegenerative diseases like different types of dementia, like frontotemporal lobe dementia and also Alzheimer's. And that's my lab. And Jennifer is in my lab. Hey, shout out to you. It's nice to see you here. Okay, so why did I choose this path? So as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to do an MD, and that was my driver. And because sadly, I didn't have as many experiences working in wet lab research. I just had one, and it was not very hands-on since usually professors in small liberal arts colleges tend to publish one every 10 years, and there's no graduate students driving it, and they have classes. So in my experience, it was very limited, and I didn't know that REUs existed. So this is my my point that I want to drive. There are REUs or summer opportunities for you guys to apply. Take advantage of those. If I had known of such opportunities, that's where my school dropped the ball, but you guys don't drop the ball and apply to these opportunities beyond Cornell, even though Cornell has amazing research. Broaden your scope. And anyway, so I knew I liked science. I knew from childhood, I loved the outdoors. I was always a very inquisitive child. So I thought MD, but I realized because I did volunteer at a hospital after my gap years, and I didn't want that. And I was studying for the MCAT, like this is not what I wanted to do. So that's when I applied for my master's, and that's what really drove in that I really enjoyed bench work and science in that regard. I like the inquisitive aspect of it rather than just being a physician, which is fine if that's what you want to do. Throughout my career, I have had very good positive research experiences, both my mentors in undergrad and also my mentor in in my master's, and now my current mentor here. And they have allowed me to, or had allowed me to aside from lab work, explore other things. And I'm very involved in outreach, and I was when I was in undergrad. I reduced it during the master's, but I was still very involved in outreach and teaching. And teaching is like one of my drivers, because I wish I had received more of that mentorship, and I don't want students like me to fall behind. And I love teaching. So I'm part of many SACNAS that allows me to mentor and also create workshops to, I guess, pass the baton in a sense. And that's where I have built a community. So I want to drive in the last point, which is support network. Like, I chose this path because I had a support network behind me. I had people who pushed me. And so you have to really acknowledge who your mentors are as advice, talk to them, and also find your network once you're here. Like, I have found my home in SACNAS members, and yeah. So I have a lot of pictures of friends. And I have to point out this picture of Julio on the bottom right. If you zoom in, he has quite a pose, which is, I had to put this picture because Julio, it looks good. Okay. Let's talk about that picture, Julio.
Well, interesting kind of transition here. Thank you for, yeah, as many of you noticed, I think in the pictures, a lot of us in SACNAS are very close, and we have a lot of pictures together because we value each other, we want to support each other, and we try to empower each other. So my name is Julio. As Mariela has mentioned, I'm a first-gen Chicano. My parents are immigrants, so my story has a very immigrant kind of association with it. On the top left, or I guess on the right, top right there on the left, it's my dad's family, and I come from a very large family, at least he does. So he left Mexico to come to the States with my mom to give a better life for their kids. And certainly I can say today that their sacrifices are not in vain. On the top right, that's just our family there with my dad's sister there. So I'm a 6-year PhD student in the biological, I guess now it's the biomedical biological sciences program in the Department of Molecular Medicine. And I'm currently in the lab of Richard Sirion, where we study a lot of cell signaling networks, but in particular, my thesis involves a tumor suppressor known as PTEN, which negatively impacts a very important cell signaling pathway that is constantly abused by cancer. So my question is, how does this loss of this tumor suppressor lead to cancer's ability to suppress the immune system by perhaps changing PD-L1, which is a ligand known for its immunosuppressive effects. So my background, as I said, I didn't say this actually, I grew up in California where my parents ended up, and I went to public schools, and I ended up at Cal Poly Pomona, where I studied a Bachelor's of Science in Biotechnology. And I guess I'll touch up on the last few pictures here. There's just, of course, friends that I've generated here at Cornell, beyond SACNAS and within SACNAS, both in the lab and outside. If we can go to the next slide. So my journey really didn't begin to, my journey really began when I was a kid. I was always a very curious individual, like many of the individuals here. When you get excited about science, it's one thing, but when you have someone there who is very passionate about science and helps you ignite that flame, it becomes even more rewarding. And certainly the common theme here with many individuals is that mentors are very important. Why did I go into biotechnology? Well, growing up, my brother was, my oldest brother really liked engineering, and he was very techie. And, I always liked technology, building my own computer and gaming, and not really knowing what I was going to do. I thought I was going to be an engineer, but when I got into high school, I didn't really appreciate math as much as I thought I would. But what I did appreciate was in my AP Bio course, I was able to use recombinant DNA and put GFP, the GFP experiment in your bacteria. And this idea that you being us humans can really use these biomolecular machines, or just these technologies to generate novel technologies, whether it's a simple tag to help us identify positive cloning, or going into the biomedical field. But on the top right here, we have my first significant mentor, Dr. Adler Moore, who was responsible for encouraging me to apply to programs at Cal Poly Pomona. Two of them listed here on the slides: the MBRS RISE program, which was an NIH-sponsored program to increase minority students basically to get their foot in the door with biomedical research. And then in California had California's Institute of Regenerative Medicine, Bridges to Stem Cell Research, which I also was encouraged to apply to by her. And both were very rewarding experiences. They were some of them were year long, some of them were just 6 months, but they basically paid some form of stipend for me so that I didn't have to work and I could focus on the sciences. So I really owe a lot to her. And Dr. Sanchez, no relation to my last name, but he's listed there in the middle. He's a dork. He's a geek. I have the same shirt because he gave it to me. But he was really one of the first individuals, not only that inspired me, but someone that actually could sympathize, empathize on the personal struggles that I had. And he really vouched for my my application process too, for PhD. So that's kind of why I'm here. And the last picture I'll just mention is baby Julio here, who I found me breaking a barrier. And I like to think that with the help of others, I've been very fortunate to break a lot of barriers in my life. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that are relating to my life or the immigrant story that I have, how it pertains to the PhD program.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ala Fargley. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate in genetics, genomics, and development. This is in the same department as Irma and Mariella, just a sister program. And I did my undergrad degree at SUNY Potsdam in upstate New York, and I completed my degree. It was a BS in biochemistry. And right now, I actually switched labs last semester, so I am now in a new lab, and I am detailing the single cell regulatory landscape in fibrolamellar carcinoma. And this is a rare form of liver cancer that afflicts predominantly adolescents and young adults. And this is in the lab of Praveen Sethupathi. Next slide, please. Now, as for why I chose this path, I think growing up, I was always fascinated by science in particular. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson said, the two gateway drugs or gateway sciences into science, or gateway drugs into science, I don't know, are dinosaurs in space. And for me, it was definitely space. And I would always watch Bill Nye's show growing up. That's my boy right there. And it just sparked something to me. I was always reading the science books in science class. And I have known since a very early age that I wanted to be a scientist. So it was a very natural progression for me to get here. But more importantly, I think it's about how I got here. So I'm showing a few pictures here of some friends from undergrad. At the top right, this is at a C-STEP symposium. If those of you are familiar with C-STEP, I do believe Cornell has that here. It's a collegiate science technology entry program. And they really helped me find research opportunities in the summer, get some money for textbooks and things of that nature. At the bottom right, I actually did a research experience for undergraduates, a summer research internship here at Cornell in the summer of 2016. And that's me posing with my poster that summer. And I can't leave out some of my close friends in undergrad, shown here bottom left during graduation. And many of us, well, everyone in this picture is either in grad school or med school, and I still keep in touch with them now. Another reason I wanted to go into academia, or at least continue in academia, is because I feel like the relationships you make are very important, and particularly in the outreach side of things. So at the top left, this is a event that my undergrad held through the chemistry club. This year I was president of chemistry club, and we have this event called Chemtoberfest, kind of like Oktoberfest. And what we would do is invite local elementary, middle, and high schools to come by. And we would just do all these crazy science experiments like the elephant toothpaste, chromatography with leaves. We had like karaoke groups come by and sing. And this year was pretty awesome. We had our biggest showing. We had like 1,000 students come by that day from like the local schools and stuff. And you know, all of these things really solidified the path that I wanted to take, more academic as opposed to industry. The support system of friends that I had along the way to really help me make sure that this is what I did. There were definitely some moments where I thought, I don't know if I could do this. So some people identified themselves. So I am also a first gen college student, not just graduate student. And I did want to take a gap year after undergrad because I felt like I wasn't ready. And I had faculty members and friends say, dude, like you're the most ready, prepared person in the world. Like this is what you've wanted. And without them, I think honestly that gap year would have extended into like an indefinite break if someone didn't shake me out of it. So support system was always incredible help for me to actually go on this path.
Hi everyone, my name is Vivi. I'm a combined DVM PhD student. I'm in the third year of the combined program. So I've done 2 years of vet school and this is my first year of the PhD portion. Like Julio, I'm in the BBS program, Biomedical and Biological Sciences. And I am concentrating in immunology and infectious disease. I'm in Brian Rudd's lab and we study CD8 T cell development. And I didn't put the name of my thesis here because I'm still like figuring out what I'm doing, but I think I'll be studying developmentally regulated microRNAs and how we can use them to kind of force T cells to be more memory-like you'd want in a vaccine response, or more cytotoxic effector killer cell-like you'd want to clear cancer or clear an infection. So for my background, I was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and I moved to Tampa, Florida when I was 8. So I kind of have these dual roots. And so both of my parents are also from San Juan. They both came to college in the US and they both have higher education degrees. They went to law school. And it was always kind of like understood that I would go to college. So that is a huge privilege, paved my path. I was never not going to go to college because of my family expectations, I guess. So I ended up going to Harvard. Once I got into Harvard, I couldn't not go. And that's kind of like a recurring theme, I think, in my education, maybe subconsciously until now that I've been reflecting on it, doing a couple panels, is I think this pressure or kind of desire to go to the most prestigious places or get the most degrees because it's what my family expects from me, and my parents moved us to Florida in order to take advantage of the American system. So I went to Harvard, and I guess a step back, I just always loved nature. I always loved animals and was just fascinated, like a few other people have said already, with the natural world. And like, I can't believe that we exist in space. Like, that's crazy. And my science classes, I always loved them and I thrived in them. So I thought that I would become a doctor until I did a summer research experience in an attempt to make myself a better pre-med candidate, doing research at a lab at Harvard studying neuronal splicing in C. elegans. And that kind of burst open the doors to research for me in this like intellectually curious community that would meet for journal clubs and go back and forth on different scientific ideas and where are we going to take this project. And that was just so inspiring to me. So then I was questioning med school. You can go to the next slide also, which I think yeah. So I was like questioning med school. I did a couple of other summer things, and I spent one summer at the Oregon National Primate Research Center before my senior year of college. And that is where I saw lab animal veterinarians at work. And it kind of, this field that I didn't previously know about kind of combined my interests in tending to organisms, you know, taking care of other living things and helping science move forward. So that's what kind of got me interested in vet med. And I then spent 2 gap years. At that point, I was torn though still. So I'm just super indecisive. But I spent 2 gap years. I moved to LA, also kind of serendipitous. I moved to LA because I had this like hippie fantasy of living on the West Coast and like all my problems would be solved. And the job that I got at LA just through going on like Indeed and looking at, you know, research tech openings was at a tumor immunology lab at Cedars-Sinai, which is a hospital. And that was my first experience in immunology and in cancer biology. And I had an amazing mentor there. I think that Dr. Shao, who was my PI there, and who's also a radiation oncologist, was my first mentor who was not only a great mentor in lab as far as the wet lab techniques go, which all of my previous PIs had been great at that aspect. Dr. Shao kind of like saw this curiosity in me and was like, Vivi, you were meant to go to grad school. Like, I'll write you a great recommendation for whatever you want. But like, he kind of pushed me to not kind of narrow in on only vet school, even though I thought that I wanted to be a lab animal vet. But I kind of ignored him. And when I applied to vet schools after my first year out of college, I just applied to DVM programs and I got into Cornell, like the most prestigious one. So that's where I went. And it was during my first year of vet school that I kind of fully came to realize that the things that I kept on fixating on going through my anatomy class and physiology class are things that are unknown. And why is it that this is a mechanism for how this cell reacts? And I was kind of craving that scientific creativity. So I ended up transferring into the dual degree program. So that's kind of my journey of how I got to this point. And I've always also loved teaching. And that's something that also became clear to me during my first year of vet school, that just in like studying with my peers and in trying to clarify concepts with each other and writing on the board and whatever in our tutor groups, I just love teaching and I love boiling down concepts that are otherwise really complicated. But so I think that what I want to say is that it's okay to not know exactly what your future is. It's hard for me to think about my future, even though I'm excited for the future, but I don't often think about it. And I think it's important to keep our keep open-minded. In addition to diving into the details and going deep with science and interests, it's also important to have a breadth of awareness and a breadth of experience. And I think working with worms and flies and monkeys and mice kind of not only solidified my interests, but made it easier for me to get into grad school, because depth and breadth are both things that I think. Yeah, and that's also in the bottom right. I just put like, yeah, I don't know if my pictures are as well thought out as the other wonderful panelists. I love Oso so much, our family dog.
Thank you to our panelists for such amazing intros and really great pictures. Very, very interesting. So now we're going to move on to the panel portion of our event. Before we start though, just a couple reminders. We're going to limit each question we have on the slide to about 2 to 3 panelists, just so we make sure we can get to as many questions as possible. And then also for panelists that want to answer the question, if you could raise your hand in like the raise your hand function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, just so we know like what order and who can speak, just so everyone gets a turn. Yeah, that's it. So our first question regards what previously developed experiences or skills, research related or not, did you find to be personally beneficial in graduate school?
Vivi, you can start.
Okay. So one thing that I think is huge that I didn't realize before is firstly kind of believing yourself and having faith in yourself, because you're the driver of your project, and that can be easier said than done. But also importantly is collaboration and communication. So I'll keep it brief, but for example, for the BBS program, you do 3 rotations. It's kind of like trial runs and 3 labs and do many projects. And then you ultimately choose a lab. And I rotated with Irma in Bob Weiss's lab, and we like hit it off and collaborated really well, which led to a beautiful friendship, but also us continuing to work together. And I luckily got my name on the paper that Irma recently published, which is great for career-wise.
Irma, you can go next.
Yeah, I guess I have, like, first of all, I think all the panelists are really good in their intro slides. And I think that maybe I was a little too serious, but I think that indecision was definitely a part of it for me as well. I have, as you know, I double majored, right? So science for me wasn't always like me, I want science since young age, actually. I was really interested in social sciences and literature specifically. So indecision, I think, can be beneficial and can later lead to you discovering your values. And I think for me, and like Vivi mentioned, a big value that I have and now can recognize is collaboration. And for me, even in my thesis lab, right, I couldn't decide on a mentor. That's why I'm co-mentored. And I think that it was a great experience. I am now like able to get the best of both worlds. I have a mentor in the biomedical sciences and one in chemistry. And I think that was really good for driving science along, and like it just was very complementary project wise, and then led to me facilitating other collaborations, right? Like from that experience, I learned how awesome it is to work with as many people as you can, and to learn from others. And I think that that's part of what I always seek every day in graduate school. And it's important to realize also that the mentors can come from anywhere. Doesn't have to be your PIs. Vivi taught me many things as well. And all my students or colleagues, I would say, teach you more maybe than your direct PI. So I think that's a really important point. Try try to go to a program where the environment is good, that you can facilitate these collaborations well. And then the other one that I wanted to comment on was leadership. I think leadership is a skill that is undervalued, especially in undergrad. I mean, I see you guys and Curb and all you're doing and helping your local environment. And these are skills that you can put on your resume. And I think for me, graduate school is where I became more of a leader than previously in undergrad. In undergrad, I was always just like a member of organizations and not driving the projects. Here is really where I found more of my voice and how I can influence others. And like many of the other panelists mentioned, outreach is a big thing. I think that science in the future is going to lead to more outreach and service and advocacy. So you developing your leadership skills now and wherever you end up in your professional degree program can definitely help you in whatever career goal you have at the end, because this can always be utilized in your interviews later for jobs or for academia route. Yeah, and help you mentor others.
Julio can go next.
All right. My advice goes to kind of what led me into science was understanding what you like to do in life could really point you in the direction of where you want to go. Part of that was hobbies, which could actually benefit you not only in mental health department, but depending on your hobby, it could give you leadership, it can give you service, it can help you with your communication. For example, my hobby early on was video gaming. I used to play a lot of video games. A lot of them were cooperative, MMO, RPGs, World of Warcraft, that got me to be communicative. It was part of my ability to talk to people, but also it led to me wanting to understand how a computer was function and how can I build one myself, which evolved into photography, which evolved into something in graduate school that I don't think I would be the same person if it wasn't for these hobbies, because certainly they changed my trajectory in life, not only because of where I am today, but they helped me come out of science too. They helped me come out of the lab and go outside and take a picture, or I can help people with things that I've learned on my way. So certainly I think your hobbies, don't think of them as not part of your curriculum. Your hobbies certainly are translatable, not only as for you as a human being, but I think they certainly impact your ability to be a scientist. Because one example is as a hobbyist in photography, I needed to learn how to use Photoshop, and that was something I learned in high school. And so those things continue to be a part of who I am, inside and outside of the lab. So I'll leave it at that. But certainly hobbies, I think, are underrated in terms of a hidden curriculum that you could really use.
Okay, so our next question is, if you took a gap year, how did it make you a stronger applicant?
Marielle, you can start.
So I took more than one gap year, because since I thought I wanted to do medical school, I took a gap year for my master's. And my master's was 3 years long, which usually they're 2. But I have to say my experiences during my master's, actually even before my master's, because I volunteered at hospitals and I did things. So at least that made me acknowledge that like medicine or like a physician, that's not for me. So having those experiences at least discarded something from my list. So when I did my master, that enhanced my, I guess cemented my idea that, oh, I like the inquisitive nature and like the discovery part. And that allowed me to just like continue and apply for PhD programs. And again, I'm going to reiterate the mentor, and Irma, more than Irma, touched on this, that the mentors I met along the way oh my God. So sometimes you don't acknowledge that they're mentors until like they're no longer in your life, or sometimes they contact you. But when you look back, if they do contact you, or even if they don't, send them an email, because of them, you're where you are. And those mentors that pushed me and that I met especially during my master's, they're with me forever. So that's all I have to say.
Julia, I'm not sure if you still have your hand up from before, but if you want, you can answer.
I didn't take a gap year, so I could talk about how a gap year probably would have helped me, but I'll let other people answer the actual question.
Sure, no problem. Irma, you can go.
Yeah, can you actually go back to my first slide or second slide maybe? I don't remember. Let me see. Yeah, first slide. Oh no, sorry, second slide. Okay, yes. Yeah, so definitely I took a gap year and I definitely think that it was necessary for me. Okay, so in my case, I talked about this influential mentor, Dr. Cherise, which was great. And I stayed my whole time with her at UCSD, being McNair and being in that lab. However, I did not like the enzymology research and the evolutionary question. For me, that was part of why I actually was questioning going to grad school, because I didn't feel completely passionate about the science. And for me, I was always like, is it because I enjoy the research? So I don't know if it was because I truly didn't like the science and maybe I leaned towards like my social science degree. And that's part of why I looked into other research opportunities. It was the money and it was also the interest. And for me, because I was in an evolutionary bio lab, I wanted to try my hand at more direct disease approached research. And that's why I started looking into these pharmaceutical company internships, because a lot of them were always disease focused. And like Mariela said, for me, the mentors always stay with you. I really agree with that. So up on top of Cherise are my industry women mentors. So at Takeda, it was Ashley, and at J&J, it was Mandana. And so these were my direct mentors in industry. And yes, sorry, they were paid. And I think for me, that was what was necessary. I didn't know if I knew I wanted to do a PhD because I liked the inquisitive part, but I didn't know what program to apply to. There it is. I didn't know what I wanted to study. And so that's why I took my gap year. And I wanted to see if what kind of program I would apply to and whether it would be disease research more. And okay, and then the other reason, which is a big one that a lot of people don't talk about too, is the gap year was necessary for me because I thought that I wanted to save money before going to my professional degree program. And I knew I was also living in California at the time, and I knew that I wanted to apply to somewhere not in California. So moving expenses and everything I was going to need to save for. So that was another reason I took that gap year in industry, to solidify the research interest in disease and what program I would apply to get more time to study for GRE and application components. Like I said, I worked a lot in industry during undergrad. So it wouldn't have been feasible for me to have time to also apply to graduate school my senior year. That would have been like, I would have been overextended and that wouldn't have been a good application. So that was another reason. And then also just to save money before moving cross country.
Vivi, you can go next.
So I'll briefly reiterate something that Irma said, which was, and I think Mariela too, and the mentorship that I got during my gap years was huge. I hadn't really had that before. Huge for getting a good letter of rec because really being in a full-time job for a whole year, you really get to know whoever the mentor is in a way that I didn't get to know just in my spurts in the summer. And maybe that's my own fault because I wasn't that proactive. But that's one thing. Another thing is kind of clarifying my path, which is kind of silly for me to say because I changed my mind after my gap year. I was like, I'm going to be a lab animal vet. And now I'm in a PhD program, but I still needed that time to kind of question things. And I purposefully applied to Cornell for vet school because I knew that I would have the option to transition to combined degree after a year. And then thirdly, I needed time between structured school to get to know myself. I think it was in my 2 years in LA, not having the attachments of getting the good grades, like being in my same social bubble from undergrad, that solitude and detachment from things that really shape my identity. Also, in my senior year of college, I did a lot of sexual assault survivor activism, which was like so kind of emotionally taxing that during my gap years, being detached from all of that really helped me have a stronger sense of self, make contact with my spiritual side, which I never did before. I think maybe because I was clouded a bit by being so obsessed with like getting an A. And it really kind of put my values into perspective so that when I got to grad school, where it is really emotionally challenging, I think I'm more able to handle the challenges. At the same time, there's a lot of people that don't take gap years that still do great in grad school. So really, you're the only one who knows. Whatever you do, it'll be fine.
Thank you, guys. So our next question is, what resources did you use for the GRE, and when should I start thinking about taking the GRE?
Ala, you can start.
Sure. So for the GRE, as I mentioned before, I was in C-STEP and they were able to pay for textbooks for me to study on my own. And I think the GRE now, it's at least at Cornell, they don't really weigh a lot in the application process. And I would, whenever you decide to apply for grad school, I would ask some of the graduate students how much the GRE is weighed in your application. It's really research experience that graduate programs look at and see if you do have any experience doing science. They want to make sure that you like doing research. And that is what grad school is. It's not really so much test taking at that point. And in addition to that, I think my year was the last year that my department actually accepted the GRE, and a lot of graduate programs are increasingly dropping the GRE requirement. In my opinion, I would see if you could find a program that doesn't require a GRE. I think it's a waste of money. It's not really indicative of your success of a graduate student. It's just an extra hurdle that you have to go through. And applying for grad school is already a hurdle, right? There are fees for that as well. So that would be my honest opinion, is look for any programs that don't look for GRE requirements. If you do find a program that does require the GRE, see if you can find something like C-STEP or another program that can fund some study materials for yourself. And then as for when you should start thinking about taking the GRE, I think the GRE scores only last for 3 years or something. And you need to use those scores when applying for graduate school. So just take it within that 3-year margin, and I think you'll be all right.
Marielle, you can go.
So you can actually take the GRE multiple times and you can send your best scores. It's not like the MCAT that does a cumulative. So you can send your best scores, but I did that and I personally do not recommend doing that. It barely changes and you're just putting yourself in a position that is so stressful and unnecessary. So that's my advice. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so our next question is, why did you choose Cornell? Tell us about your experience applying to graduate school.
Paula, you can start.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, I did a summer internship here at Cornell. So I got a firsthand experience of what the graduate experience would be like here at Cornell. And it was actually in the same department I'm in too. So it was a one-to-one comparison. And I would say if you can find an REU at a program that you really like, see if you can apply to that. And that will be a really indicative experience of whether you like research, grad school, and that program. Now, as for why I chose Cornell for myself, as I mentioned, Bill Nye was my boy. He came here. So that was like the superficial reason as to why I came here. And then more realistically, it was not just the research that I found really interesting from all the faculty members in the department, but in addition to that, it was a collaboration between all the different faculty members. It's really common to find faculty members that want to collaborate with other people in the department. And this really takes your project in interesting directions that you didn't think it would go into. And those opportunities are really, really exciting. And in addition to the academic side of things, there's a social side of things. I even though I grew up in New York City, I know a lot of people don't like the size of Ithaca, but I think it's okay for me. It's like the smallest I would go in terms of like town city size, but it's enough for me. And I go for like Latin dancing. There was a martial arts gym that I would go to. So I had all the things that I was interested in doing socially. And that is incredibly important, especially with how stressful grad school is, to find those mediums that you can kind of have some cathartic release from all the stressors and pressures.
Irma, you can go next.
Okay. Yeah, so I think I'm going to reiterate a lot of what Ella said, but for me, I remember when I was applying. So I applied in my gap year, right? So I communicated this to J&J, and they were very, very supportive of me taking time off for interviews and such. So first off, I would say that if you're getting application fee waivers, which you should try to get, try to apply to as many programs as you're interested in, right? Because it is really like subjective in terms of admission and interview process for graduate school. And like Allah said, it's mostly based on your research experience. That's the most heavily weighed. So for me, I applied to about 10 programs. I paid for 1 out of 10. Everybody else gave me an application fee waiver. And then out of that, I got 5 interviews. So I went to the 5 interviews, and I would say that even that was too much. Like 5 interviews was a lot. So if you can narrow it down even further, I would recommend it. But I went to the 5, and I remember when I was interviewing and I would come back to work, and everybody told you that why you pick your program is like gut feeling. And I remember being so annoyed by that. And I'm like, how am I don't feel the gut feeling or whatever. But then when I came back from Cornell, I did feel it. I was just like, oh yeah, I really liked it. And even my coworkers, like asking me how it went, determined that that was the place I was going to go just from my reaction to the interview. And I think for me, it was the people. I thought I was really intimidated to interview at Cornell. It was the only Ivy League, I think. Oh no, I also interviewed in Hopkins. I'm not sure if that's Ivy League. But I was intimidated to go to these like high-end institutions. I predominantly only went to public school before. And I thought it wouldn't be what I would want in an environment. I thought it would be competitive and such, where I would be grilled through the interview process. And Cornell wasn't like that for me. I thought everyone was very genuine, everyone was very collaborative, as Alaa said, and I could really see myself fitting in here. And I thought it kind of had a California vibe, like in a very relaxed manner, or at least for our program. So that's why I chose it here. It was kind of a gut feeling. And as in terms of Ithaca and it being small, that was a fear. But I thought if I had enough people around, that would be good. And I saw enough to do here, like Alaa said as well. And for me, also money. So picking the correct program and how much your stipend is going to allow for you to live in. I didn't want to stress about money anymore. I had enough of that in undergrad. And I'm really glad, and I don't regret coming to Ithaca. I think you can definitely live on your graduate student stipend pretty comfortably here. And so looking at how much your finances will be affected by where you go. So for me, that financial stress hasn't been a part of graduate school, and that's what I wanted.
Vivi, you can go next.
Just one more like tangible thing that you might keep in mind is that some grad schools do rotations where you, like I kind of mentioned, do a trial period in like 3 or 4 labs and then choose a lab that you'll do your PhD in. And some have you apply straight to an individual lab. And I know I needed to do rotations to make the right choice in what lab I would join. So just something to keep in mind.
Julio, you can go next.
Yeah, so I want to touch up real quick on the previous question about the GRE. And obviously, many sentiments have already been shared about how the GRE is kind of not indicative at all to your success as a graduate student. But certainly, if someone in the audience is looking to improve on the GRE, it's really improving on how to take the GRE. So, I mean, and that usually is paying for someone who has sat on like the committee or understands the test, like what the reviewers are looking for. Like they tend to be like, you pay for those things, which is kind of, I mean, for me, it's bothersome because it's not inclusive of people that would otherwise not be able to afford those things. But if you're looking to do the absolute best, then look into getting, paying for something that teaches you how to do the GRE, because it's about time. You don't really have enough time to do it, and it's about hitting the bullet points. It's about the test, and it has nothing to do with how well you do in the PhD. But yeah. But why did I choose Cornell? I sympathize with Irma. The idea of feeling very welcome here, the individuals that I interacted with were, I felt like they wanted me. I felt like they actually cared about who I was and what I would bring to the school. And it was away from home too. Like I wanted something new. Growing up in California, I was wanting something different, and they took us around campus, and it was a beautiful place on top of all the great basic research that was happening at the vet school and at the Weil Institute. It's just a very solid place to be. And I mean, who wouldn't want to come to Cornell for a PhD program? So yeah, that's my answer for that.
Thank you all so much for sharing. Our next question is, tell us about your transition to graduate school. Have you experienced imposter syndrome while here or during the application process?
Marielle, you can start.
Well, I have to say I experienced imposter syndrome hardcore, especially during my first year when I was taking classes, and I had gap years. And since my undergrad had been years since I had taken a biochem course, and I felt like at a loss. And so what helped me with this was actually talking about it. And I know that's difficult, but we always think, oh, I feel imposter syndrome. No one else does. Somehow that's how I got it in my head. But when I heard some of my now good friends talking about it on the side, I joined that conversation. So don't be afraid to join those conversations with people you may feel comfortable, or reaching out to help. Like, there's nothing wrong talking to like CAPS, the Cornell therapist, or anyone about it. Because I feel like when I held this in, I had some anxiety, and I was very stressed. When I started discussing these issues with my peers, with my friend group, sincerely, that helped me become a better student. Also, alleviate some of these fears. And I have to say, I'm a fifth year now. There's still remnants of imposter syndrome. I don't know if it's ever fully gonna go away. Sad to say, guys. But I'm dealing with it better by talking about it. Even I bring it up now even to my PI with some topics, not with everything, because I like to keep that relationship, a different type of relationship. But I do share some of the things especially when I'm feeling uncomfortable with something, or so talking about it, and it doesn't fully go away, but it can improve. That's my 2 cents.
Julio, you can go next.
Yeah, so the imposter phenomenon, right? I think we've all experienced it to some degree, but it really is going to depend on what your background is. For me, in particular, my background is something that I didn't grow up quite fondly of. And being an immigrant or a son to a family of immigrants and being first generation, it was very early on that I began to see myself as someone very different. And this idea that I rejected my culture, and this child wanted to assimilate as fast as he could, led to an imposter phenomenon today that takes the weight of everything from the past, whether it's my past or your past, whether it's because you're an immigrant, whether it's because you're a woman in STEM, whether it's because you feel like you don't deserve to be here for X, Y reasons. I think the idea that we are our worst enemies is absolutely true, especially in a graduate program, in a PhD program, because a lot of it goes on you, your schedule, your self kind of your self-improvement, but also your self accountability. You begin to eat at yourself. So how do people get through that? I mean, obviously it's friends. It's about giving yourself the time, the hobbies, the self-respect, going to psychotherapy and dealing with your traumas of your past that actually haunt you to this day, whether you know it or not. I think most people have some type of feeling in their life. Even if you have had a very privileged life, there are moments that will eat at you. And so perseverance is absolutely necessary in a PhD program. But even if you are a very perseverant person, you can't just keep hiding or suppressing things that have caused trauma in your life that manifest as this imposter that you feel like you are. So certainly to alleviate that, sometimes I think a gap year might even be the reason why some people are happier in a PhD program, and maybe that's something we can discuss. But finding yourself is, I think, helpful for quenching some of the imposter phenomena that might occur.
Yerma, you can go next.
Yeah. So I had imposter syndrome even during the application process, right? One thing that I didn't share and was on my first slide too, was when I was a senior in undergrad and thinking about applying to PhD programs. And a lot of the free waivers that I mentioned that I was able to get, I actually got at SACNAS conference. So through McNair, I was able to go to SACNAS conference my senior year of college. And that was really transformative experience for me. And that's probably how I envision myself or got a little bit through the imposter syndrome and envisioned myself in a PhD program. And again, it was through seeing representation. And it's something that people don't talk about, but that was like key for me. So I went to Cornell's table and I saw another student from a similar background. He was Hispanic. He was in his later year in graduate school, also doing a PhD in the same program. And we kind of connected over that. And he said, you know, just give Cornell a shot. He gave me his business card and I had a lower GPA. So my first 2 years of undergrad didn't go that great. And I was always kind of feeling that my GPA would never allow me to get into a PhD program. And that was where I mostly felt imposter, and what I would ask at the booth, like, is there like cutoff? Like, will they actually look at my research experience and weigh that heavily at your institution? So Steve was really predominant in changing my opinion on applying to Cornell, at least. He said that the admission process, at least for the program that I was interested, would be more holistic and would weigh research experience more, which I felt was my strong area. So that was one incident, but a pretty integral one, right? Like, as you go and you start applying, you're starting to self-select out, which is what most of us do. So if I hadn't had that experience, I likely wouldn't have applied to some of these more high caliber PhD programs like Cornell and Hopkins, because I thought I wasn't good enough, right? So that's an important thing. Like Mariela said, talk about it and then get your network out there, and also just, you know, feel confident and give it a shot. Okay, and then also when I got here, I also had imposter syndrome. I mean, I still have it. I still deal with it today, but it was more pronounced in the first 2 years, of course. So similarly to Mariela, she talked about, I had also been out of school. So the classes for me were not the best. I kept thinking that I would once again not do well in exams, and then that would lead to, you know, these worry and anxious thoughts of, I'm gonna not get kicked out of the PhD program or whatever. They'll find out. And then the second one was like when we do our qualifying exam. So most PhD programs do your qualifying exam. And so now you have a thesis project and you have a proposal and you have to defend it. And that was a really imposter syndrome time for me. And the advice that I have there is, like Mariela said, talk about it, but also find your support system and your support network. Find people that feel like you do, because that's really validating. And you can talk about that experience and they can be like, you know, I thought that too and I got through it. They let me in still. I'm still here, 5th year, right? And that was really important for me. I had a lab mentor that really got me through that exam, essentially with just supportive words. And what I learned from that was, okay, so I need to be encouraged when I'm feeling this way, right? And so now I do it for myself. And that's my last point. Be your own self-advocate. If you don't have the support system or whatever, or your PI is not giving you positive reinforcement, then you do it for yourself. You're here. Like, Cornell let you in. So I'll walk around like complimenting, oh yeah, you know, like that was me. Thank you. So nowadays, like when I'm feeling that way, then I'm just trying like fake it till you make it type of thing. That's my last advice.
Maybe you can go.
Oops. Okay, so one more word on the imposter thing. I feel like such an imposter. Never in my life have I felt like more of an imposter than I do in grad school. And I've realized that part of it is that in vet school, it's so clear what's expected of you. And same thing in undergrad. You know, you have the essay to write, you have a deadline that you can't ignore. So you do the thing and you check the box. it's a lot less structured progress in grad school. So and I talk about this with my friends. So like I've taken the advice of older grad students who are like, talk about it, be candid, don't suppress it. Like I'm trying to do that. I still kind of feel like an imposter. But one more thing is to like be kind to yourself and understand. And I think I'm starting to accept that progress in the PhD is so not linear and is sometimes invisible. And that I think is part of why it makes it so hard. And I do talk about this openly with my PI, which is helpful for me. And he reassures me that, like, no, Vivi, I'm not worried about the rate of your progress. Like, you will get a paper in the next 3.5 years. Like, it's going to be fine. So it helps me to talk openly with him and to be reassured that this, like, I'll be cranking out experiments for 2 months, feeling great. And then I have a lull and I don't know what to do. And then I feel crappy. I need to be nicer to myself. Internalize these words, talking to myself.
All right, so let's move on to our, oh, sorry. So let's move on to our next question. In the interest of time, we're going to have to limit this question to only 2 panelists. And for the next question as well, we have 2 questions remaining. So DeAndre, would you like to introduce this question?
Yes, thank you, Jen. So how have you navigated graduate school as an underrepresented minority? What challenges have you faced and continue to face?
Vivi, you can start.
So I think similar to what Julio mentioned before, I think that my background as immigrating to Florida and wanting to fit in and assimilate has kind of like come up to the surface in these impostery feelings. So that has been more of like an internal struggle, and also this thought that like, am I only here because I'm a minority? Like, have these schools only let me in because I'm a minority? And I like hate that I even have that thought, but these internal struggles, I'm working on it by talking about them, by finding community that I feel safe in through SACNAS with people with similar backgrounds, and knowing that I'm like not alone, I guess.
Ala, you can go next.
Yeah, so I think I share some of the same sentiments as Vivi. So I mentioned I grew up in New York City, and I was 6 when 9/11 happened, and I was bullied a lot and went by my middle name Richard. I went by Ricky until I was like around 19, 20. And I kind of like suppressed any like Middle Eastern Arab identity that I had. And I've been kind of reclaiming that in the past few years. And while I was reclaiming this, it really started happening, like I would say, the past 2-3 years. And there isn't really like a big Arab graduate student. There aren't many Arab like graduate students. Let's just put it like that. And it's been a little difficult trying to reclaim the identity and not having anyone to associate or like talk to about it with. And at some point, I think like you kind of just have to take matters into your own hands. So last week, I registered a graduate student Arab student association, and I got in touch with like 5 or 6 students, and it's a start, and it's really great to be able to talk to them. We Zoom each other and we drink tea over Zoom, and it's great. So for me, yeah, the identity, trying to reclaim it, trying to better understand myself, and not really having that community here has been difficult. And I would say, don't be. It's great if you can find the community at the graduate program that you go to off the bat. If you can't, see if you can take matters into your own hands and do something about it, to, put together a cultural association or something.
Thank you for sharing. This will be one of our last questions. So tell us about something you would have liked to know before you got to graduate school.
I'll let you go.
For me, it was mental health. I don't think I took it that seriously for myself until I got to graduate school. And we've had students talk about imposter syndrome and all of these like academic related mental health issues. I definitely have some of my own personal life like issues that I've had to deal with, and I've never really had the opportunity to go to a counseling session before graduate school. And now that I'm here, I just started going since it's included in the student plan, and it's paid dividends for me, honestly. Um, and a lot of the issues that I feel like people talk about, I feel like I've addressed. I'm much more comfortable with myself and where I am, and how I'm doing in graduate school. And it's definitely a process. There are lapses where I feel like I fall back into that state of purgatory where I don't know what's happening. But, my counselor and I have worked out these little tricks to help me bounce back quicker, right? I don't think anyone ever completely eliminates these thoughts, but they develop techniques to bounce back quicker. And for me, counseling was the catalyst to be able to do that.
Julio, you can go next.
Yeah, I think on top of everything that I've already said in terms of, and what Allah said in terms of mental health, it's been an extraordinary 3 years getting to know myself and reclaiming a lot of things that I had rejected in my past. So kind of mental health, of course, is a big one, but I think since that's already been talked, I'll talk about organization, because as many people have said, your PhD it's your, or grad school, you're on your own for the most part, unless of course your PI is a very like micromanager, and we can talk about PIs, but you I didn't have anyone organized in my life to like learn like very basic things that most people would take like just for granted. But like it's surprising to me that how much I didn't learn from just watching my parents, that it hits me hard today. Like organizing myself in the lab, making to-do lists, having a planner, like those things. If you're an organized person, that's great, and that's going to help you a lot. But if you're an organized person, but you put a lot of pressure on yourself, it doesn't matter how organized you are if you don't have that support, if you don't have that mental health network that supports you, or if you're not going to psychotherapy. I think everyone should really go to psychotherapy. But I think that's one thing is I would have liked to known the dynamics too of PIs. Like your PI should be there as a mentor, but also someone that you talk to on a very one-on-one level. And if you have a problem in the lab, ask for help. I wish I would have known and fostered a dynamic between me and my PI that would have helped me a little more, especially given like my mind's just everywhere sometimes. So organization, talking about it, and talking to your PI is a good one.
Irma, you can go next.
Yeah, I want to agree with everybody and what they said so far, but I will touch on something that someone else hasn't said, and I think that's fellowships/grants, especially at your career level. I think that you guys have a really good opportunity in applying to NSF as an undergrad, and if you are sure you're going to do a PhD, you can apply, and you actually have a better shot at getting NSF at the undergraduate stage than at the graduate stage. And you get 2 opportunities, right? So if you do not get it your undergraduate year, you can apply when you are in grad school again, and resubmit. So for me, and maybe many of the other panelists, I didn't know about NSF or any other fellowship grant opportunities, really. I was never really aware of that. And so that's just a missed opportunity, right? And then another part, like now that I got into graduate school, then that the question becomes like, again, everyone chooses a lab and a PI and a different mentor. And that mentor could encourage you and tell you about fellowship and grant opportunities, but they could also not. And I got lucky in the sense that my PI did really encourage and help with grant applications. So I applied to so many, you guys. I applied every year to so many until I finally got one. And I think that's a really important point too. Like you want to be applying every year because it takes time to practice and hone a skill. And then once you get a grant too, that can instill confidence and it help you. It helped me with my imposter syndrome, right? Like now there's a funding agency willing to believe in you and fund you through your PhD. And it gives you a sense of scientific freedom as well. And looks good on your CV. So I would say definitely familiarize yourself with fellowship grants, and especially if you are a minority, because there are a lot of grant opportunities that are designed to help us and to mitigate the gap and of disparity that exists in this country. So like some that I want to, HHMI, Gilliam is a big one for diversity people. Ford Fellowship is one that I didn't apply to and I actually regret. I think that that would have been a good one to apply to. NSF, as we heard, Department of Defense. You wouldn't think so, but they fund basic science. And yeah, and then there's also always institutional internal fellowships. So Cornell has a few. I think when you're applying, make sure that you fill out, for example, diversity statements. If the application requires a diversity statement, write it, because that was going to give you practice also. Diversity statements are not going to go away if you stay in academia. You're going to have to write more. So first of all, it gives you practice. And then second of all, it can make you eligible for an internal institution grant, which I also got my first year here. And then again, another fellowship you can put on your resume. So just, yeah, make sure you know that there are like national fellowships that you can apply to. Oh, and NIH is a big one. And NIH, anyone can apply to F31 just as a graduate student. And there's also F31 diversity, which just makes you more competitive in a smaller pool.
All right, now we can open the floor up to any questions that the audience might have. Feel free to type them in the chat or also unmute and ask all our panelists. You can ask to one or you can ask to all of them. If not, I would like to invite our panelists, if you're comfortable, to share your net ID in the chat so that the participants are able to maybe contact you or ask about any specific programs that you guys mentioned or any other specific questions. So please put that in the chat if you're comfortable, and participants definitely reach out and they're all here to help you. So very thankful for that. Oh, we do have a question, I think. Yeah, so we have a question in the chat. Would you suggest doing a master's first or going straight into PhD?
Oh, Ala, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so maybe I'm a little biased because I just went straight into the PhD. But for a master's, you usually have to pay for that degree. And for a PhD, you'll usually be funded. And that is quite a bit of money that you would have to pay for the master's. So just on the financial side of things, just go straight into the PhD. And think of a PhD as like, it's an apprenticeship. It's the time to get trained. It's not the time for you to come in completely ready. There's a person in my lab and he was a lab tech for 20 years and he just got into grad school and he still complains about like everything that he has to do as a grad student. And he just didn't realize how much work it was going to be. You're never going to be ready. You just kind of have to have that leap of faith and just do it. Nike.
Mariella, you can go next.
I do agree. Like, I guess grad school is an apprenticeship. We are learning, you don't have to come prepared. But I have to say, having had the master's degree, it helped me a lot. Like I also came from a neuroscience background. So I had a lot of the background that I'm actually currently using in lab, even though I have expanded the techniques and learned in the lab. I have brought with me things that I didn't have as an undergrad. And as for the money, they are fellowships, internships. I got my master's paid. I was a Rice Scholar. So there are opportunities like that that can pay for your master's. So I did not have to pay for my master's. So if you look for those opportunities, let's say you don't feel ready, you can look for those opportunities. They depend on institutions.
All right, we have one more question in the chat. In the interest of time, this will be our last question. So what do you recommend looking into for a richer research experience during the gap years? And how much prior research experience is expected or desired when seeking out these positions?
Irma, you can start.
Okay, so yeah, this is perfect because I didn't comment on the previous one. I think what determines like gap year or master's or whatever you choose to do is, do you think you're a competitive applicant right now? And if you do not think your research experience, which is the most weighted, I would say, is up to par compared to other applicants, that's when you start seeking these opportunities. That's my opinion. And like Ala mentioned, he didn't have to do that, right? And like he had a lot of summer research experiences. So was that really necessary for him? And then the other way is like if you need some time to make your decision about what program and stuff. So those are the two reasons I think to seek a gap year or master's. And then if you are looking for the gap year richer, I would just say anything that has to do with research experience. So for me, I didn't look into an academia position. I mostly looked into industry, and that's because I really liked my industry internships at UCSD. So I think as long as it has something to do with research or teaching experience, for example, some people like to do Teach for America during a gap year. I saw a lot of that. So anything where the skills you learn in the gap year can be applied to your PhD and can make you look like a more competitive applicant when applying.
Vivi, you can go next.
So I'm different to Irma in that I pretty much only applied to academic labs for my gap years. And I think I mentioned it before, but I was just on like generic job search pages looking for these lab tech or research associate jobs. And to answer how much research experience is expected, it totally depends. Indeed.com, that's what I used. It totally depends. I applied to jobs that I had no background relevant to what they were studying, but the topic interested me and my enthusiasm came through and I got an interview. I applied to some things that I had more relevant background in and I wouldn't get an interview. So I would say just go, like, I applied to a lot of jobs, maybe like 40 at least, and got a handful of interviews and a couple offers. The one I took really excited me. I think what made it a rich experience for me, it was learning new skills. So all of my undergrad research was in neuro-related things, and I went to a tumor immunology microbiome lab. Learning new skills, that breadth will make it an enriching experience. Also, I got a really good vibe when I interviewed over Skype, I think, because this lab was in LA and I was in Boston. I got a really good vibe from the lab, and not only did I talk to my future PI for a while, but also I spoke to all of his lab members. So I knew that it was going to be a close mentorship, close-knit group. So I think knowing that I was going to get good mentorship was important to me and did make it enriching.
Julia, you can go next.
Yeah, I guess both questions can kind of be answered a bit here in terms of the master's. If you don't have the relevant experience, that is a legitimate way to get the experience sometimes. You know, if money is not an issue, then by all means, that's something you could definitely do. If money is an issue, then obviously looking for those fellowships and post-baccalaureate programs that are something we didn't touch upon today, or even the summer research experiences that many institutes have are viable ways of getting research experience before you enter a PhD program. But how do you find something that, you know, is a very fulfilling lab? It goes with where your passions are, what are your values, what inspires you. If you want to know or learn more about cancer, go into cancer biology lab. If you like coding, you can combine your interests, right? And that's something that's big right now too. So like Viviana said, you know, learning something new is going to follow you wherever you go. And as long as you're passionate about it and not just a robot in the lab pipetting, be asking questions, being involved in your project. It will be obvious in interviews if you just were someone that was just there for experience, or if you were actually really into your work, and it shows. So if you're not excited about it, just drop and find something that you are excited about. And if you feel like you don't want to like leave because you're already like too deep, then take it as that is a learning experience. And that's leverage to say on your next position, I did this, I didn't really like it, but I learned a lot, you know? So yeah, finding that is part of the problem. Information privilege is a thing. Finding out where fellowships are it could be problematic, but talk to people here on campus. Cornell is very rich in the sense of how much information they have available to their students. I'm not sure if CURB has something already where you guys have like a list of fellowships, but yeah, certainly get involved in these clubs if you're not, if you're in this chat right now. Certainly join clubs like CURB and other ones, maybe even SACNAS, who knows? Yeah.
That was a great ending and perfect way to wrap up our event today. I want to give a huge shout out to all of our panelists from SACNAS. They did amazing at sharing their experiences, their advice, and also their personal journeys. And also to our members of the CURB Outreach Committee for also helping moderate and set up this event as well. We hope to see you guys at more CURB events in the future and any other events that SACNAS hosts as well. So keep a lookout for that. And with that, that ends our event. Thank you guys so much.